You've been called because the interviewer has looked at your CV and they've deemed it to be good enough. So they're actually saying to you, you can do this job. We think you can do this job. So the first thing, and it's a hard thing to do, that when you get called to an interview is you need to pat yourself on the back. And I think one of the reasons they want to charge for Irish water is that there's something in it, because it makes us unbelievably modest as a nation. Because we cannot turn around to ourselves and say, I got called for the interview. So I want you, first of all, before you even walk into that interview, I want you to understand that you have been given already the seal of approval from them in that they think you're able to do the job. You haven't, as I said, been invited. So what you need to do is, you need to get out the job spec and the CV. And you need to find out, I'm having a Theresa May moment here. You need to find out, what are they seeing on the job spec? What are they seeing on the CV that has actually got me the call for the interview? If you can do that, you're actually probably about a quarter of the way towards getting that job. And we don't do that enough. We get called to the interview and we go grand and that's it. What I want you to do is think like the employer. If you were the employers and you had 50 CVs and you called 5 people, why have you called those 5 people? Have you called the 5 people because you've nothing to do on a Monday? Or have you called the 5 people because they are the 5 cream of the crop that you think actually could do the job? And the answer is they're the cream of the crop. So first of all, you need to get into that mind frame of, I can do this job. I'm being told by the employer I can do this job. The second, find the arrow, is pre-interview. So first impressions. So when does the interview actually start? Thanks very much. You can judge it. When does the interview actually start? So look, the interview doesn't start when you open the door to walk into the room. The interview starts the minute you get an email or the minute you get a phone call. That's when it starts. Because the person who's going to be interacting with you throughout maybe the 1 or 2 weeks build-up, they quite possibly could be sitting across from you on the other side of the desk. And we're all human. First impressions, regardless of how we want to look at them, first impressions do matter. If I was called to an interview, or if anyone was called to an interview, and let's say, I don't know, you are dismissive or maybe you're a little bit rude on the phone when you're dealing with them, how is that going to be perceived when you go into an interview? And I'll give you a prime example without listing names. I worked in a job before, and the lady that was interviewing, there was a coordinator, so she used to interview people and ask them, all the questions, and she used to get back all the feedback. And what she used to do then at the end was, she used to walk outside and have a chat with the administrator and ask the administrator, well, how were they? What were they like when they were waiting? Were they talking? Did they look a bit nervous? Now, nervous is grand, but what that person was trying to do was find out if that person might be suitable for the company. Once I was actually there when somebody's been interviewed, and they were so rude to me personally, and my employer picked up on that. So the interview doesn't start, you don't suddenly go rude, or whatever you want to be, and then the interview starts and, oh, great to meet you. You have to be, from 2 weeks out for the interview, you need to be putting your face on and going, right, this is actually the interview started. Everything that liaises between me and the employer between now and then, this is the interview. And if you do that, you've built up a bit of an aura or a bit of a rapport with the place before you've even started. So when you open the door to the interview, when you get the phone call from the interview, can you do me a favour? If you're applying for jobs and you have listed your mobile number down on your CV, do me 2 things. Make sure you have a voicemail facility set up, because if you don't, what might happen is you get a phone call off a number, might be a private number, might be a number in Dublin, might be a number somewhere else. You don't know what it's about. They've no way of leaving a voicemail for you. You have to ring that company back. Maybe it's the boss that answers the phone and you're going, I'm returning a call here. I don't know what it's about. Who are you? Straight away, the impression has been built up that this person is not very organised. Imagine if that was a customer service role and you're ringing having to go, sorry, who's this? I don't actually know why you called me. So have a voicemail. If you don't like the sound of your own voice, I completely understand that. Just set up the normal, whatever, network digital voicemail that's going to be there. Because in the past, there's been so many occasions when I've rang people to offer them either jobs or interviews, and all I get from them on the other end of the line is, what? And that's their voicemail. They think it was funnier, they set it up maybe months ago. So please, 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 set up your voicemail on your phone if you're going to be using it, because otherwise they're going to be calling you. You might be called for an interview, but if they have no way of leaving a voicemail and you have to try get back in contact with them, it doesn't build up a great first impression. So the third, knowing the job specification. This is I'm patenting this. If I ever hear anyone say this, I think they've robbed it from me. Think of a job spec as a cheat sheet for a maths exam. A job spec is a set of rules or a set of standards that an employer has put out. They have literally said, you must be able to do A, B, C, and D. I know people in the past, and I've worked with people in the past, who get called for an interview. That's fantastic. They get called for an interview, but the job spec has maybe gone off the website or something like that, and they leave it at that. They say, well, I have a general understanding of what the actual job is. Doing that, you are leading yourself into all sorts of problems. If you do not have a job spec for an interview you've been called for, pick up the phone or send an email and say, I've recently been called for the role. Can I get a most recent up-to-date job specification? Because what you need to do when you get that job specification is you need to go through it. And if you go through that job specification, you will find the majority of questions that are going to come up at interview. Because would it be safe to say, if you were going for a customer service job, right, in Croke Park, would it be safe to say that they're going to ask you, how many balls can you juggle? I was waiting for a better laugh than that. There we go, that's grand. Okay, so it's safe to say you're not going to be asked that question because it's not on the job spec. So why would they ask you that question? So if you read and understand the job spec, you will be able to come up with more or less the sort of questions that are going to be asked. And if you can come up with the questions that are going to be asked, then you can come up with the answers that you're going to give. So it's very important that when you're actually looking at a job spec, I want you to do this exercise for me the next time you get called for an interview. I want you to take out the job spec. I want you to look at it like you are the employer. And I want you to come up with 5 or 6 questions that you would ask the person going for this job based on that job specification. If you can do that, I promise you, the chances are of those 5 or 6 questions, 3 or 4 of them you're going to be asked at the interview. Because until the day robots interview us, it's going to be people interviewing people. And that's how they actually do it. They would sit down with a job spec. They are not going to put you in a position where they're asking you something that is completely irrelevant to the job. So if you understand the job spec, you're actually going to do quite well. And I always say a cheat sheet to a maths exam. Not that I ever cheated an exam. If I said to you I had the answers to a maths exam and you really wanted to pass that and you were immoral, would you take the answers off me? Of course, thanks very much. Of course not. Oh, she said of course. No, you didn't. So what I would say is the job spec is there to help you. If you don't understand the job spec, you're not going to get the questions that are going to be asked. If you understand the job spec, then you understand the types of questions that the employer is going to come out with. So number 4, I feel like I'm doing top of the pops here. Research the company beforehand. And the reason I say research the company beforehand is, I always do this with every group I work with. Picture you're the employer. Picture this is a company you've put together from absolute scratch. You've had to remortgage the house. You've had to do 4 jobs for the last 2 years. You've built the company up. You've spent an awful lot of money on it. Last year you got nominated for 2 awards. It was the first time you ever got nominated for 2 awards in your life. You're so happy with what you've done for the company. You put a job spec together for the first time for you taking on somebody. They sit in front of you and you say to them, tell me what you know about my company. And they look blankly back at you and go, I didn't really have time. As the employers, how would you feel hearing that answer? Fairly annoyed. So when it comes to being called for an interview, one of the main things you have to do is research the company. Because if you don't research the company, when you go in And when you're asked that company or that question, because you will be asked, what do you know about the company? If you turn around and have not done your homework, it just puts across to the employer that you're not really pushed whether you get called to or whether you get the job or not. Because that's how I would see it. If somebody was going to an interview and didn't do much research, I wouldn't exactly be praising or wouldn't exactly be thinking, my God, they've put in an awful lot of work. So put yourselves again in the shoes of the employer. The more you know, it's not a history exam, so you don't need to go in and go, you were founded in 1952, you have 14,000 offices across the country. Geez, that's big actually, across the world. You have 11,000 staff. Last year you got nominated for... You don't have to go into detail like that, but it can just be stuff like, well, I know you've been formed since 2010. You were nominated for 3 customer service awards last year. You won 2 of them, and you have a new project with Crow Park. You're actually helping build a new Hill 16. That just shows that you've done a bit of research. You don't need to be able to go into dates, times, everything like that. You just want to show the employer that you're actually interested in going for the interview. So, body language. I finally get used to these chairs. Okay, it's not just about what we say, it's also about how we say it. So, can I ask a question? Again, we can do yes, no with this, right? It's actually only going to work if we get yeses. Is there anyone here who does not like looking at people in the eye? 1, 2, 3. Perfect. An example, right? I'm wearing glasses, but actually I'll take them off. Do you see the bridge of my nose? If you do not like looking at someone in their eyes, look at the bridge of their nose. That's the best tip I can give you for body language. Because how I'll put it is, you've never met the people that are interviewing you before. You've never met them, so they don't know you, so it's nothing personal. If you go into them and you're looking at the ground, or you're looking at the window, or you're looking away from them, then as far as they're concerned, rightfully or wrongly, you may not be interested. And I know that is annoying, and I know that is frustrating, and you might be thinking, that's so unfair. It should be about if I can do the job, not if I can look at somebody in the eyes. I completely understand that, and I completely agree with you. But for the sake of a half an hour or a 40-minute interview, there are certain principles and certain guidelines. Body language, looking at somebody in the eyes or the bridge of their nose, that's perfectly you're comfortable with. If you're sitting down, I might as well sit down for a sec. If you're sitting down, obviously that you're sitting right back into the chair, that your hands are on your knees. If you have, what are they called, bracelets? Yeah, sorry, bracelets. If you have a bracelet, leave the bracelet in the car. If you have a wedding ring or any sort of ring, put it somewhere else if you're going to do this when you're nervous. If there's anything you do fidgeting-wise that you find in your own personal life, try cut that out. Because remember, it's a half an hour interview. They've never met you before. You might do this when you're really excited about getting something. They don't know. They might actually think they're not interested. They're just zoning out here as I'm talking to them. So it's very important. Body language puts across an awful lot of the message that you're saying. If your body language is wrong, then what will happen is the message gets lost. And a prime example, I do an awful lot of mock interviews. The amount of people I've had come into me who have had chewing gum in their mouth, and they've panicked as they've walked in the door, and they push it to the side of their mouth, and all the way through the interview, all I'm doing is, there it is again, there it is again, there it is again. The message is lost. I haven't understood, or I haven't heard a word they've said. They could have told me that they got nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize last year, but all I'm thinking is, there's the chewing gum again, there's the chewing, there it is again, yeah, oh, it's gone out to the far side now. So it's important, anything that's fidgeting like that, you need to get out. Because you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. You don't want to research the company, understand the job spec, and then go in and have a piece of chewing gum in your mouth. Common interview questions. Where's my glass of water? That's not a question, by the way. Where's my glass of water? So, common interview questions. First one, tell me about yourself. Who loves that question? Yeah, there we go. Tell me about yourself is a trick question. Tell me about yourself means talk me through your CV. The answer to this is, if it's not on your CV, don't talk about it. Don't talk about how many dogs you have. Don't talk about your latest holiday. Don't talk about where you went last night, anything. If it's not on the CV, you do not talk about it. And how you answer tell me about yourself is two things to take into account. First, talk about it from your most recent job down if you want, Or if you are maybe only new to the employment scene, talk about it from when you finished up in school or third level or anything like that. So you're just going through, well, as you'll see from my CV, I finished my Leaving Cert I didn't, but I'm just going to say it for this. I finished my Leaving Cert in 2012. I got no laughs there, thanks very much. I finished my Leaving Cert in 2012. I got whatever amount of points, and I went to college and I studied for the last 2 years, and I've recently graduated. While I was actually doing all of that, I was working part-time in a bar. So I was doing an awful lot of customer service. I was dealing with people, and that's when I started to realise that I was actually a real people person, and my sort of skills would suit your organisation. Something as brief as that. I know that's just me picking on something. But obviously, with Tell Me About Yourself, you're probably talking about a minute and a half of you talking constantly. So you need to practice it. If you don't practice it, then when you're asked, tell me about yourself, you're going to go, I've 2 dogs, I was out last night, and I've a brother and sister. So tell me about yourself, practice it. Get out your CV, go down through your CV, and actually get used to saying a bit about, and I hate to say this, sorry, it's not trying to get a laugh out of this. To quote One Direction, it's a story of your life. That's basically what it is. So tell me about yourself is a story about your life. And you need to be comfortable about talking about it. Why should we hire you? We all love this question because it means we have to big ourselves up, and we love bigging ourselves up in this country. Absolutely love it. So what you need to remember is, why should we hire you? First of all, you've been called for a reason. You've been called because you are good enough. One of the main reasons I think you should hire me is because I've been following your company for the last 5 or 6 years, and I do believe that I'd be able to offer it something to help it benefit and help it move forward. I know I just made that up, but it's basically you thinking on your feet about how you should answer that question. And why should we hire you is their way of finding out whether you can link everything back in. Job spec, CV. What happens is people go into interviews and they do an interview and they think, fantastic, I did an interview, I talked about how great I was in my job now and the job that I was previously in. So what I was doing when I was ringing people was I was reading a script, and there was no emotion to it. And what can happen is, when you're nervous at an interview, you can get so nervous that you go in and you talk like a robot. And you don't talk like the person you are. You don't talk with that smile on your face. You don't talk with that enthusiasm in your voice. And the interviewer doesn't get to actually see a true reflection on who you are, especially if it was a customer service focused role. I mean, if they want somebody who's friendly and enthusiastic and all of that, and you come across and go, why should we hire you? I think you should hire me because I'm very enthusiastic and motivated to work in this company. You're formed in 1922. Yeah. So you need to be able to get your pitch right. You need to be able to get what you're saying to come across in an enthusiastic and a motivated manner. Number 9, make sure what's on your CV is true. If you have down on your CV that you are an analytical problem solver, and you're at interview and they turn around to you and go, I notice on your CV there you said you're analytical and problem solving. Keith, give us an example of a time you were analytical. What does analytical mean first? So whatever you put on your CV, and this is the nutshell, I hear it so many times, I'm doing this, as I said, nearly 10 years, hear it so many times, people saying, I don't need your help, my CV gets me interviews, plenty of them. That's great. Does it get you a job? No, no, don't worry about that. So your CV has to match what is actually the reality. And when you are applying for a job, I've been saying it all morning and I've said it throughout my life, when you are applying for a job, to apply for a job from start to finish, if there is a job spec, should take you no less than an hour to an hour and a half. Because what you are doing is you are taking the job spec, you are taking the CV, and you're matching what's on the job spec to the most that you can put on your CV. Because if you don't, an employer is not going to pick up the phone and ring you and go, I read your CV, I was very impressed with it, I have a few questions before I consider calling you to interview or not. That's never going to happen. And I know this morning there was a CV workshop. If it's not on your CV, it doesn't exist. If it's not on your CV, you haven't actually done it in the eyes of the employer. So that's why when you're doing your CV, please don't forget about it when it comes to the interview. Because when you walk into that interview and there's 3 people sitting there, the first thing you're going to glance down at the table is 3 copies of your CV right in front of them. So if you think you've escaped it, it's waiting for you with 3 people who are just, they can't wait to ask you as many questions. So you need to understand the relevancy of what the CV has over the job spec. If you can, there is not one question on this earth they can ask you that you won't be able to answer. I promise you. If you understand your CV and your job spec, there is nothing they can ask you that you won't know the answer to. If you're nervous, you might not get out the right answer you want, but you will know it. That's the key. And number 10, feedback. We don't do this enough as a nation, and it breaks my heart. I always use the analogy. If you brought your car for an NCT and it failed in the morning, and they called you in and said, your car's failed, it's NCT, what's the first thing you would say to them? Why? Why did it fail the NCT? And they tell you, the front tire's a bit loose. Okay. So then you bring it away, you fix the front tire, you bring the car back, and they say, right, you've got it this time. Why don't we do this with interviews? If you don't get an interview, you have my permission for 6 hours. Feel sorry for yourself. Because I've had plenty of times where I've got that dreaded email or letter in the post. Feel sorry for yourself. You can, absolutely. But then decide, right, pick up the phone. Hi, I'm just calling about the recent interviews I had. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. Look, I just want to say thanks very much. I found the interviews to be very fair, but I'd love to work in this industry, so I was just wondering if I could get a bit of feedback. What's the worst they can say? The worst they'll say is, you're not getting any feedback. Now go away. You don't want to work for them. The best they can say is, well, absolutely, yeah, look, we'll give you feedback. So out of 5 in communications, you scored 3 because you didn't come across, you focused more on you as working as part of a team and not your individual accomplishments. Right. So for the next interview you go for, you walk into that interview going, I now know from the last time I spoke too much about the team. I need to speak more about myself and I. So it's very, very important when you're following all the feedbacks that you ask the employer, because if you don't ask the employer, you're going to go and do the exact same interview and probably give the exact same examples and probably do the exact same body language. So you need to find out why you didn't get the job. If you find out why you didn't get the job, you can fix it for the next interview. Okay? How are we on time? Friends. So the last slide is perfect. Wouldn't you want to know why your car didn't pass the NCT? And if the answer is to that, yes, I would want to know, then you've no excuse not to ring feedback. I know it's a bit humbling and it's a bit ringing and saying, why didn't I get the job? It's your life. It's your career. There are no rules. You make them up. If you want to ask for feedback, you ask for feedback. If they want to be annoyed at that, let them be annoyed at that. But it's your career, nobody else's. So, do I tie this in nicely? I should have been a weather forecaster. So as you'll see to my left, I have questions and answers. So just underneath it as well, I've my other handles like Coburn Guidance, Facebook Coburn Guidance and CV Writing, coburnguidance@gmail.com, and my mobile is there. I'm actually also out doing a CV clinic. So if there's any stuff that you feel after this talk you'd like to have a chat with me about, by all means, please do.
Okay, that was fantastic. We will take a few questions from the floor if there are any.
Perfect. Are there any questions from the floor?
I think it was very comprehensive, but no question of that. Yes.
Gentleman at the back. Sorry.
You're looking at like when you're looking at a number of interviews.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you're saying, does the strategy change at all either if you, number 2, 3 or 4?
The strategy doesn't change, but the questions will. So I've experienced this. For the first interview, I was asked a brief. The second interview then, and they had the notes. So they were able to say, I know what the first interview Keith spoke to the guys about, Can you go into a bit more detail? So if you get called back for a second interview, you need to understand that the notes that were written at the first, they haven't been shredded. They're sitting there waiting for you to come in. So you need to try and remember what examples did I use for that. They'll refresh your memory anyway. They'll say you said in the last interview such and such, but you need to be able to drill down into the nuts and bolts of what you said in the first interview.
Okay, any other questions? Madam?
There is, yes. So what I will do is, if you want to take down my email address, and email me and just say, because I've done this in Galway about 2 or 3 months ago, and a few people alright said, can I have it? So email me, say you'd like my PowerPoint presentation, and I'll email it off to you. It's free.
Okay. Anybody else? We've got a few here. Sir. Telephone versus face-to-face interview for those who might be able to hear that.
If you're the employer, I suppose a telephone interview suits. Because if you're the employer, you might not have the facilities or the time to be able to, maybe get somebody to come in and sit with you, or to have maybe a day given over. So really, it's probably the employer on that end that is going, this actually suits me much better. If it's a phone interview, you don't need to worry about body language. That's the best thing. So you can look out the window. It doesn't matter. But again, the same logic comes across. If you make a statement, you have to have an example. If you're asked about something that needs passion in your tone of voice, you need to be able to put passion in your tone of voice.
Okay. Now we'll take one more. Sir.
Any suggestion for getting more feedback during the interview, like asking the interviewers to be more open? Because sometimes they don't tell you what you're doing wrong, and that could be just their misinterpretation.
Yeah.
Or they're actually right, but they just don't say it, and later you get feedback
yeah. Yeah, that's why I don't want to say I invented interview questions, but one of the questions would be, is there anything I've said here today that you'd like me to clarify or go back over, because I would really love to work in this organisation? That is forcing a company into doing it. That is forcing a company into looking at their notes and going, actually, yeah, we weren't too sold on what you said about AB. Can you expand a little bit on AB? That's the only really way that you're going to get an employer to do it. And then obviously with a bit of follow-up feedback at the end of the interview.
If you want to see this presentation again, it'll be on the website, jobseekers.ie, for Monday, okay? And in fact, all of the guests at the seminar here will be on there as well. So you can check that out. And of course, Keith said to email him as well, and he'll organise that for you. Please put your hands together again for Keith. That was a fantastic presentation.